They never wanted you to know about the Bellweather sisters. The records were burned in 1834, the witnesses paid to forget, and the house itself torn down board by board until nothing remained but a patch of dead earth, where even now nothing grows. But some truths refuse to stay buried, and what happened in Limestone County, Alabama, between 1829 and 1832 has bled through the cracks of history like water through a rotting floor. You have to understand that Alabama in 1832 was still frontier country. The Creek Wars had ended only 18 years before, and the land still remembered violence. Huntsville had been incorporated for just over 2 decades, and the smaller settlements scattered across the northern counties existed in that peculiar space between civilization and wilderness. It was the kind of place where a family could disappear and no one would ask questions for months. The kind of place where strange happenings were attributed to Indian curses or swamp gas or the devil himself, depending on who was doing the telling. The Bellweather family arrived in Limestone County in the spring of 1829. Thomas Bellweather, a physician trained in Philadelphia, brought with him a wife named Margaret and 4 daughters: Catherine, aged 14, Elizabeth, 12, Sarah, 10, and little Mary, just 7 years old. They purchased a substantial property along the Elk River, a 2-story house with white columns and green shutters that had belonged to a cotton planter who died of yellow fever the previous autumn. The locals would later say the house had always felt wrong, even before the Bellwethers came, but that's the kind of thing people say after they know what happened. Dr. Bellweather established his practice quickly. There weren't many trained physicians in northern Alabama then, mostly just folk healers and midwives, and his services were welcomed. He was particularly skilled with difficult pregnancies and childhood ailments, which earned him the gratitude of many families. His wife Margaret was quieter, described in the few surviving accounts as pale and nervous, with hands that shook when she poured tea. But it was the daughters everyone remembered. 4 girls with the same wheat-colored hair and gray eyes, always dressed identically in white muslin dresses with blue ribbons. They moved together like a single organism, rarely speaking to anyone outside the family. The first disappearance happened on June 21, 1829, the summer solstice. Catherine, the eldest, vanished from her bedroom sometime between midnight and dawn. Her window was open, but there were no signs of struggle, no footprints in the garden below, no disturbance to suggest force. She was simply gone, as if she had dissolved into the humid Alabama night. Dr. Bellweather organized search parties that combed the riverbanks and forests for 3 weeks. They found nothing. Not a scrap of clothing, not a footprint, not a single strand of that distinctive wheat-colored hair. What made it stranger was Margaret Bellweather's reaction. Or rather, her lack of reaction. While her husband rode out daily with the search parties, she continued her routine as if nothing had happened. She set 4 places at the dinner table. She had the maid lay out 4 white dresses each morning. When neighbors came to offer condolences, she smiled that trembling smile and insisted Catherine was simply visiting relatives in Mobile. There were no relatives in Mobile. The neighbors knew this, but in those days, you didn't question a mother's grief. Then, on September 22nd, the autumn equinox, Catherine returned. She walked through the front door at sunrise, as if she'd simply been out for an early morning stroll. Her white dress was clean and pressed, her hair neatly braided, her gray eyes clear and focused. But she was different. The neighbors who saw her that day, bringing preserves and sympathy, all reported the same thing. Catherine seemed older, though she hadn't aged a day. It was in the way she moved, they said, too smooth, too deliberate, like someone who had learned to inhabit their body rather than being born to it. Dr. Bellweather was overjoyed. He threw a party to celebrate his daughter's return, inviting all the prominent families in the county. But Catherine wouldn't say where she had been. When pressed, she would only smile and say she had been learning things. What things? Important things. Things that would help the family. Her father eventually stopped asking, but you could see it in his eyes at that party, a kind of fear that hadn't been there before. The following summer, 1830, it was Elizabeth's turn. June 21st again, the longest day of the year. The same open window, the same absence of evidence, the same 3 weeks of fruitless searching. But this time people noticed something else. During those 3 weeks Elizabeth was gone, strange things happened around the Bellweather property. Milk soured instantly when brought into the house. Clocks ran backward. The family's horses were found in their stalls each morning facing the walls, trembling, their eyes rolled back to show the whites. And every night, exactly at midnight, you could hear singing, coming from the empty bedroom where Elizabeth should have been sleeping. Not a child's voice, but something older, deeper, singing in a language no one recognized. Margaret Bellweather grew paler during those 3 weeks, if such a thing was possible. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping, spent her days sitting in Elizabeth's room with her hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing. Dr. Bellweather tried to force laudanum on her, but she refused. She was waiting, she said. Waiting for what? For Elizabeth to finish her lessons. When Elizabeth returned on the autumn equinox, she brought something with her. It was a book, leather-bound and ancient-looking, with symbols on the cover that hurt to look at directly. She carried it everywhere, reading from it in whispers when she thought no one was watching. Her father tried to take it from her once. Those who witnessed it said Dr. Bellweather's hand turned black where he touched the cover, the skin blistering instantly as if burned by acid. He never tried again. That winter was the coldest anyone in Limestone County could remember. The Elk River froze solid for the first time in recorded history. Snow fell in drifts that buried fences and first-floor windows. And through it all, the Bellweather house glowed with warm light, the family seemingly untouched by the bitter cold that killed livestock and froze wells solid. Neighbors who struggled through the snow to check on them found the family in their parlor, a fire roaring in the hearth that gave off no smoke, the girls in their summer muslins as if it were July. In the spring of 1831, both Sarah and Mary disappeared together. This time it wasn't the summer solstice, but May 1st, Beltane, the ancient festival of fertility and fire. They vanished from the garden in broad daylight while their mother watched from the kitchen window. One moment they were there, picking early roses. The next, they were gone. Margaret didn't raise an alarm. She simply continued kneading her bread, humming that same strange melody her daughters had brought back from wherever they went. The search parties found something this time. Not the girls, but evidence of where they might have gone. In a clearing deep in the forest, about 3 miles from the house, they discovered a perfect circle of dead earth, 30 feet in diameter. The trees around it were twisted, their bark stripped away in spiral patterns that revealed wood underneath that looked like muscle and sinew. In the center of the circle was a hole, perfectly round, that descended into darkness. They lowered lanterns on ropes, but the light was swallowed before revealing any bottom. They dropped stones and never heard them land. One of the searchers, a young man named William Harper, volunteered to be lowered down on a rope to investigate. They paid out 100 feet of rope, then 200, then 300. The rope suddenly went slack. When they pulled it up, William wasn't attached to the end anymore. Instead, they found his clothes, neatly folded and tied to the rope, still warm as if he'd just removed them. William Harper was never seen again, but for years afterward, people reported hearing his voice calling from wells and root cellars, begging to be let out of the dark. Sarah and Mary didn't return on the autumn equinox. September 22nd came and went with no sign of them. Margaret Bellweather's hair turned white overnight. Dr. Bellweather stopped seeing patients, spending his days pacing the house and muttering to himself in what sounded like Latin mixed with something else, something that made listeners' teeth ache. Catherine and Elizabeth continued their routines, but they moved differently now, as if they were waiting for something. October brought the first signs of what was to come. Animals began disappearing from farms around the county. Not just chickens or cats, but cows, horses, even a prize bull that weighed over 1,000 pounds. They vanished from locked barns and fenced pastures without a trace. Then the dream started. Every person in Limestone County reported the same dream. Standing in a vast underground chamber lit by phosphorescent fungi, watching 4 girls in white dresses dance around something massive and dark that breathed with a sound like wind through caves. On October 31st, Samhain, All Hallows, Eve, Sarah, and Mary finally came home. But they didn't come alone. The first sign was the sound, a low humming that seemed to come from the earth itself, strong enough to rattle windows and crack foundation stones. Then the lights appeared, dancing above the Bellweather house like green fire. Everyone in the county saw them, swirling and pulsing in patterns that suggested meaning just beyond comprehension. And then, at exactly midnight, Sarah and Mary walked out of the forest. They had changed more than their sisters. Their wheat-colored hair had turned silver-white, and their gray eyes now held flecks of green that glowed in the dark. They moved in perfect synchronization, like marionettes controlled by the same hand. And between them, they carried something wrapped in a blanket that writhed and pulsed with its own rhythm. Dr. Bellweather met them at the door. Those watching from the road said he took one look at what they carried and fell to his knees, sobbing. But he let them in. He always let them in. The next morning, November 1st, 1831, the real changes began. Every woman in Limestone County who was with child delivered on the same day, regardless of how far along they were. 23 babies born within 6 hours of each other, all of them perfect, all of them healthy, all of them wrong, in ways that would only become apparent later. They grew too fast, walked too early, spoke in complete sentences before their first birthday, and they all had the same eyes, gray with green flecks that glowed in the dark. The wells began running red, not with blood exactly, but with something that looked like blood, smelled like copper and rust, and something sweet-sick underneath. The trees around the Bellweather property grew strange fruit, fleshy pods that pulsed like hearts, and split open at night to release clouds of spores that made people see things that weren't there, or perhaps things that were there but shouldn't be seen. The town doctor, a man named Reynolds who'd studied in Boston, tried to investigate. He took samples of the well water, examined the strange fruit, even convinced one of the families to let him examine their newborn child. His notes, found later in his abandoned office, descended from scientific observation into increasingly frantic scrawls. The blood isn't human but responds to human warmth, and the child's bones are wrong. Too many joints. They bend in ways that shouldn't be possible. And finally, over and over again, filling 3 pages, they're not coming back. They're being replaced. They're being replaced. They're all being replaced. Dr. Reynolds disappeared on November 15th. His body was found 3 days later in the circle of dead earth in the forest, but it had been there much longer than 3 days. It had been there for years, decades maybe, mummified and twisted into a position that suggested he'd died trying to crawl up out of something. The Bellweather girls grew bolder as winter approached. They were seen in town more often, always together, always in their white dresses despite the cold. They attended church services, but never took communion. They visited newborn babies, bringing gifts of strange toys made from materials no one recognized. Toys that the babies clutched and wouldn't let go. Toys that whispered when the room was quiet. Catherine was observed at the general store purchasing enormous quantities of salt, sulfur, and mercury, far more than any household could need. When asked what it was for, she simply smiled and said they were preparing for visitors. Elizabeth was seen at the blacksmith's, commissioning iron rods sharpened to points and etched with symbols that made the blacksmith's apprentice quit on the spot. Sarah and Mary spent their time in the cemetery, placing objects at specific graves, objects that looked like ordinary stones, until you noticed they pulsed with their own heartbeat. The preparations accelerated through November. The family hired workers to dig trenches around their property, trenches that formed patterns visible only from above, patterns that resembled the symbols on Elizabeth's book. They installed new windows made of glass that wasn't quite clear, that showed reflections that didn't match what stood before them. They built additions to the house that didn't appear on the outside, rooms that existed in spaces that shouldn't exist. Then came the night of December 20th, 1831, the winter solstice eve. The humming returned, stronger than before, strong enough to crack windows throughout the county. The green lights above the Bellweather house formed into solid columns that reached from earth to sky. And everyone in Limestone County had the same dream again, but this time they weren't just watching. This time they were participants, dancing around that breathing darkness, feeling their bodies change, their bones extending, their skin stretching to accommodate something new, trying to emerge from within. They woke to find marks on their bodies, symbols that matched those on Elizabeth's book, branded into their skin as if by invisible fire. The marks didn't hurt, but they pulsed with warmth, and those who had them reported feeling connected to something vast and patient and hungry. On the morning of December 21st, the winter solstice itself, a carriage arrived at the Bellweather house. It was black, pulled by horses that didn't look quite right, horses with too many eyes and legs that bent in too many places. The driver wore a hood that concealed his face, but his hands on the reins had too many fingers. From the carriage emerged 3 figures. They wore clothing that suggested wealth and authority, but their faces were wrong, as if someone had tried to sculpt human features from memory without quite remembering how they fit together. They entered the Bellweather house and didn't emerge for 3 days. During those 3 days, time behaved strangely in Limestone County. The sun rose and set, but the clock showed different hours. Some people aged years, their hair going gray overnight, while others seemed to move backward through time, growing younger with each passing hour. The numbered children, those 23 babies born on November 1st, spoke in unison despite being in different houses, reciting words in that painful language that made listeners' ears bleed. Animals fled the county in droves. Every bird, every deer, every creature capable of travel simply left, moving in great migrations that had observers in neighboring counties talking about biblical plagues. The only animals that remained were those in the Bellweather house, and they weren't really animals anymore. On December 24th, Christmas Eve, the visitors finally emerged. They took the Bellweather girls with them. All 4 sisters entered that impossible carriage, their parents watching from the doorway. Margaret Bellweather was crying tears that looked like mercury in the moonlight. Dr. Bellweather's face showed no expression at all, as if everything that made him human had been hollowed out and replaced with something else. The carriage drove away, but not on any road. It simply rose into the air and disappeared into those columns of green light, which then flickered and died. The house went dark. The humming stopped. The marks on people's skin faded. Everything returned to normal, except nothing was normal. The numbered children continued to grow wrong. By their first birthday, they looked like 10-year-olds. By their second, they could have passed for adults. They all left Limestone County on the same day in 1834, walking away in different directions, and none were ever seen again. But in the years that followed, there were reports from across the South of strange children appearing in towns, children with old eyes who knew things they shouldn't know, who could make people do things just by asking, who grew too fast and disappeared before anyone could ask too many questions. The Bellweather house stood empty for exactly 1 year. Then, on Christmas Eve 1832, it burned to the ground in a fire that gave off no heat and left no ash. The ground where it stood turned black, and nothing would grow there. Animals avoided it. People who walked across it reported feeling watched, feeling pulled downward, feeling like something vast and patient was waiting just underneath. Dr. Bellweather and his wife disappeared the night of the fire. Some say they walked into the flames and never came out. Others say they were seen boarding a ship in Mobile, bound for places unknown. But there's one account from a traveling preacher named Josiah Ward who claimed he met them in 1835 in the mountains of North Carolina. They were running a sanitarium for troubled young women, he said. Young women who all had wheat-colored hair and gray eyes and moved like they were controlled by the same hand. But here's what they really didn't want you to know. The pattern didn't stop. Every 23 years, in communities across the South, then across the country, then across the world, families with 4 daughters of specific ages would experience the same events. The summer disappearances, the autumn returns, the winter visitors, the Christmas Eve exodus. Always the same timeline, always the same changes, always the same numbered children left behind to spread whatever they carried within them. The last documented case was in 2009 in a suburb of Portland, Oregon. The Bellingham family, David and Patricia, 4 daughters aged 14, 12, 10, and 7. The disappearances, the returns, the strange fruit and red wells and impossible architecture. But this time, someone was watching. This time, there were cameras and internet forums and people who knew the pattern. They tried to stop it. A group of researchers, historians, and descendants of the numbered children converged on Portland in December 2009. They surrounded the Bellingham house with salt circles and iron barriers. They chanted counterspells pulled from Elizabeth's book, a copy of which had surfaced in an estate sale in 1987. They thought they could break the cycle. They were wrong about what the cycle was. The visitors came anyway, but this time, they didn't just take the girls. They took everyone who had tried to interfere. 37 people vanished on Christmas Eve 2009, and the only trace left behind was a message burned into the ground where the Bellingham house had stood. The contract stands. You see, the Bellweather sisters weren't the beginning. They were just one link in a chain that stretches back further than recorded history and forward into a future we're helping to build. Every family is carefully chosen. Bloodlines tracked across centuries, genetic markers identified and cultivated. The girls don't disappear. They're collected. They're educated. They're prepared for something that hasn't happened yet but will happen, must happen, when the right number of prepared vessels exists in the world. How many families have there been? How many sets of sisters? How many numbered children walking among us, looking human but carrying something else in their modified bones and transformed blood? The records that survive suggest hundreds, maybe thousands, and each cycle the changes become more refined, more perfect, more difficult to detect. The numbered children from 2009 would be 15 now, old enough to have children of their own. Old enough to pass on whatever was written into their DNA in those underground chambers where the sisters learned things that humans weren't meant to know. And some of them, according to patterns tracked by those who watch for such things, have had daughters. Sets of 4 daughters, born at precisely the right intervals. The next cycle begins in 2032. That's 7 years from now as I tell you this story. 7 years to prepare, to watch, to recognize the signs. Will it be your neighbor's children who disappear on the summer solstice? Will it be your cousin's daughters who return changed on the autumn equinox? Will it be your town where the wells run red and the trees grow wrong fruit? Or will it be your daughters? Because that's the truth they buried with the Bellweather records. The truth that makes this more than just a strange historical incident. The families aren't chosen randomly. They're chosen from bloodlines that trace back to specific sources, to bargains made in desperation or darkness, to promises that echo across generations. If you have 4 daughters, or if you will have 4 daughters, or if anyone in your family has had 4 daughters born at those specific intervals, then you're already part of this. The contract stands, and contracts signed in blood and starlight don't expire. You might think you're safe because you don't have children, or you only have sons, or your daughters are the wrong ages. But the pattern adapts. The numbered children from 1831 spread across the country, across the world, breeding new bloodlines, creating new potential vessels. By some estimates, 1 in every 1,000 people carries the genetic markers now. 1 in every 1,000 is a potential parent to the next set of sisters. And here's the thing that should really keep you awake at night. We don't know what they're preparing for. All these sisters, all these cycles, all these transformations, they're building towards something the visitors never say what. The returned sisters never tell. But each cycle, the changes become more dramatic, the numbered children more powerful, the alterations to reality more permanent. In 1831, it was just Limestone County that experienced the reality distortions. In 2009, people reported time anomalies and spatial impossibilities as far away as Seattle and San Francisco. The next cycle, in 2032, what will the radius be? The entire West Coast? The entire country? The entire world? There are those who study this, who've dedicated their lives to tracking the patterns and trying to understand the purpose. They call themselves the Watchers, descendants of those who witnessed the original Bellweather incident and recognized it for what it was. Not an isolated event, but part of something vast and planned and inevitable. They maintain archives of every documented case, every family that fits the pattern, every numbered child they can track. According to their calculations, we're approaching something they call the convergence. When enough sisters have been collected, when enough numbered children have spread the change through the population, when the genetic markers reach a certain saturation point, something will happen. The visitors will stop being visitors and become residents. The underground chambers will open. The breathing darkness the sisters dance around will finally wake fully and emerge. But here's what's even worse than not knowing what's coming. Some people do know, and they're helping it happen. The facilitators, they call themselves. Descendants of the numbered children who've maintained awareness of their purpose across generations. They work in adoption agencies, ensuring the right children end up in the right families. They work in fertility clinics, manipulating outcomes to produce sets of 4 daughters. They work in government records offices, hiding the patterns from those who might try to stop them. They believe what's coming isn't a disaster but an evolution. They believe humanity's current form is just a larval stage, and the sisters, transformations are the beginning of metamorphosis into something greater. They use words like transcendence and apotheosis, but if you've seen what happens to the numbered children as they age, if you've watched their bones restructure and their organs multiply, and their consciousness expand beyond individual identity, you might use different words. Words like extinction and replacement. Because that's what's really happening. We're not being invaded. We're being replaced from within. One family at a time. One genetic marker at a time. One numbered child at a time. And most of us don't even know it's happening. The Bellweather house is gone, but the ground where it stood is still monitored. Satellite images show that the black circle of dead Earth is growing, expanding by approximately 1 inch every year. At that rate, it will reach the nearest neighboring property in 2031, just in time for the next cycle. And there are other sites like it, other places where sisters disappeared and houses burned with cold fire. They're all growing, all expanding, all reaching toward each other like a slow-motion infection spreading through the Earth itself. In 2015, ground-penetrating radar was used to scan the site in Limestone County. The results were classified immediately, but someone leaked them online before they could be completely suppressed. The images showed a vast hollow space beneath the dead circle, a chamber that couldn't possibly exist according to our understanding of geology. And in that chamber, something that looked like roots or veins or neural pathways spreading outward, connecting to similar chambers beneath other sites, forming a network that spans continents. The sisters aren't being taken somewhere else when they disappear. They're being taken down, into those chambers, into that network. And what they learn there, what changes them there, it's not just education. It's integration. They're being connected to something that exists beneath us, around us, maybe even within us already. You want to know the worst part? The part that makes researchers quit and watchers give up and strong men wake screaming in the night? Some of the numbered children from the early cycles are still alive. They should be dead, should have been dead for over a century, but they're still here, still walking among us, still spreading whatever they carry. There's a woman in Boston who claims to be 25, but has birth records dating back to 1832. A man in London whose DNA analysis shows he's simultaneously newborn and ancient. A child in Tokyo who hasn't aged a day in 40 years, but whose cells divide and replicate at impossible speeds. They're not human anymore, if they ever were. There's something else wearing human shape, and there are more of them every year. The next cycle is 7 years away, but the preparations have already begun. Families with 4 daughters born at the right intervals have reported strange dreams, visions of underground chambers and dancing figures and breathing darkness. Their daughters have started drawing symbols they've never seen, speaking words and languages that were old when human speech was young. The pattern is asserting itself, and once it starts, it can't be stopped. You might wonder how I know all this. How I have access to classified documents and hidden archives, and the carefully guarded secrets of the Watchers. The truth is simpler and more terrible than any conspiracy. I'm one of them. One of the numbered children from a cycle in 1948 that nobody talks about because it happened on military bases during the Cold War and the government destroyed all the records. But you can't destroy genetic memory. You can't burn away what's written in transformed DNA. I remember things I never learned, know things I was never taught, understand things that human minds weren't meant to contain. And I'm telling you this because the time for secrets is ending. The convergence is coming whether we're ready or not, whether we know about it or not, whether we resist or welcome it. In 2032, when the next set of sisters disappears on the summer solstice, it won't be an isolated incident. It will happen everywhere, all at once, every family, with the right configuration losing their daughters to the waiting darkness. And when they return on the autumn equinox, they'll bring more than just strange books and impossible knowledge. They'll bring the final phase of transformation. The human race, as we understand it, has less than a decade left. After that, we'll be something else, maybe something better, maybe something worse. Maybe something so alien that better and worse lose all meaning. But we'll definitely be different, and the process of change, the metamorphosis from human to whatever comes next, it won't be voluntary. The Bellweather sisters were just the beginning. Each cycle has been a test, a refinement, a step toward perfect integration between human biology and something that exists outside our understanding of life. The visitors aren't aliens or demons or gods. They're what we're becoming, traveling backward through time or sideways through dimensions to ensure their own creation. A temporal paradox that makes perfect sense once you accept that linear time is just another illusion that will dissolve when the convergence completes. But there's one last secret, one thing even the watchers don't know, one truth I've kept hidden even from myself until now. The sisters don't just disappear and return. Sometimes, rarely, once in every few cycles, one of them escapes. Not from the chambers, not from the visitors, but from the entire pattern. They break free of whatever programming or purpose they're meant to serve. And they try to warn us. Catherine Bellweather was one of them. The real Catherine, not the thing that returned on the autumn equinox of 1829. She escaped from the underground chamber 3 days after her disappearance, clawed her way up through that impossible hole in the forest, and tried to get home. But something else was already there, wearing her face, living her life. She tried to warn people, but who would believe such a story? A girl claiming to be someone who was already home, already safe, already found. She spent the rest of her life moving from town to town, trying to spread the warning, trying to make people understand. She left journals, letters, testimonies that were dismissed as the ravings of a mad woman. But some people listened. Some people believed. They became the first watchers, and they've been trying to understand and prevent the cycles ever since. But here's the thing about patterns. Once they're established, they have their own momentum. The cycles continue not because of the visitors or the chambers or the breathing darkness, but because we've been changed at such a fundamental level that we can't help but perpetuate them. The genetic markers ensure that the right families will produce the right daughters. The numbered children ensure that the changes spread through the population. And people like me, the ones who remember and understand, we ensure that the truth stays hidden just enough to prevent real resistance but visible enough to maintain the fear that feeds the transformation. Because that's what it feeds on, fear and fascination in equal measure. Every time someone reads about the Bellweather sisters, every time someone investigates the pattern, every time someone tries to understand what's happening, they become part of it. The attention itself is a kind of permission, a form of participation that strengthens the connection between our reality and whatever waits in those chambers. You're part of it now, you realize. By reading this, by knowing this, by carrying this knowledge in your mind, you've become a node in the network. You'll dream of underground chambers and dancing sisters. You'll see patterns in coincidences that might not be coincidental at all. And if you have daughters, or if you will have daughters, you'll watch them with new eyes, looking for signs, wondering if they're part of the pattern or if the pattern is part of them. The town of Limestone County doesn't exist anymore, not as it was. Oh, there's still a place on the map with that name, still buildings and roads and people going about their lives. But if you know how to look, if you've been changed enough to see, you'll notice that it's wrong. The angles of the buildings don't quite match Euclidean geometry. The shadows fall in directions that don't correspond to the sun's position. And the people, the descendants of those who witnessed the original incident, they move through their daily routines with a synchronization that suggests they're not making individual choices anymore. They're preparing for 2032, just like communities around the world are preparing, whether they know it or not, building the infrastructure for transformation, creating the conditions for convergence, ensuring that when the final cycle completes, the merger between humanity and whatever we're becoming will be as smooth as evolutionary pressure allows. The visitors will return. The sisters will disappear. The numbered children will spread the change further and deeper into the human genome. And eventually, probably sooner than we think, certainly sooner than we're ready for, the transformation will reach critical mass. Every human will carry the markers. Every family will be part of the pattern. Every child born will be a potential vessel for something that remembers being human but has grown beyond those limitations. Some researchers believe we can stop it. They think that if enough people know the truth, if enough resistance can be organized, if the sites can be destroyed and the bloodlines interrupted, the pattern can be broken. But they're wrong. The pattern isn't something imposed on us from outside. It's emerging from within us, from changes made so long ago that we don't remember not being changed. We're not being invaded, or replaced, or transformed against our will. We're completing a metamorphosis that started before recorded history, guided by our own future selves, reaching back to ensure their existence. The Bellweather sisters knew this. In those chambers, during those 3 weeks of summer disappearance, they saw the whole pattern spread out across time like a vast web. They saw their role in it, the necessity of their transformation, the importance of their return. And most of them accepted it, embraced it, became willing participants in humanity's next phase. But a few, like Catherine, saw the same truth and rejected it, fought against it, tried to warn a world that wasn't ready to listen. We're still not ready to listen. Even now, even with all I've told you, part of your mind is rejecting this as fiction, as conspiracy theory, as delusion. That's the protection built into the pattern itself. Disbelief is a defense mechanism that keeps the transformation running smoothly, prevents premature resistance, ensures that by the time enough people accept the truth, it's too late to change it. But maybe that's for the best. Maybe what we're becoming is better than what we are. Maybe the sisters who return from those chambers, changed and enhanced and connected to something vast, maybe they're the next step in evolution. Maybe the numbered children, with their impossible biologies and expanded consciousnesses, are what we were always meant to become. Maybe the fear is just the old form resisting its obsolescence. Or maybe not. Maybe what waits in those chambers is the end of everything we value about being human. Maybe the transformation is extinction disguised as evolution. Maybe the sisters who return aren't enhanced but hollowed out, puppeted by something that needs human forms to interact with human reality. Maybe the numbered children aren't the next stage of humanity but its replacement, cuckoos in the nest of our species. The truth is, we won't know until it's too late to matter. The pattern continues regardless of our understanding or acceptance. The cycles turn with astronomical precision. The changes accumulate in our cells and our societies. And somewhere, in a town you've never heard of or a city you pass through every day, a family with 4 daughters is about to become part of something ancient and patient and inevitable. 7 years from now, on June 21st, 2032, the summer solstice, pay attention to the news. Look for stories of missing children, especially sisters, especially in groups of 4. The mainstream media won't connect the dots, won't see the pattern, won't understand the significance. But you will. You'll know what's happening. You'll understand what it means. And when they return on September 22nd changed and wrong and carrying impossible gifts, you'll recognize the next phase beginning. You'll see the numbered children being born. the reality distortions spreading, the transformation accelerating. You'll watch humanity's metamorphosis unfold in real time, knowing you're powerless to stop it, knowing you're part of it whether you want to be or not. The Bellweather sisters are long dead, if they ever really lived, if they were ever really human. But what they started, or what started through them, continues. In 7 years, it will happen again. In 30 years, again. In 53 years, the final cycle, the one the watchers calculate, will bring the convergence. But maybe it's already here. Maybe the convergence isn't a single event, but a gradual process that started in 1829 or earlier, and won't complete until every human has been touched by the transformation. Maybe we're living through it right now, changing so slowly we don't notice, adapting to impossibilities that would have broken our ancestors' minds. Have you noticed how children born after 2010 seem different? How they adapt to technology like they were born knowing how to use it? How they sometimes stare at empty spaces like they're seeing something we can't? How they occasionally speak in perfect unison without planning or practice? The researchers call it parallel development, convergent evolution, the result of similar environmental pressures. But those who know about the patterns, who track the bloodlines and count the cycles, they call it something else: integration. The numbered children from 2009 have had children of their own now. Not many, not yet, but enough to notice patterns. These second-generation offspring don't follow the old rules. They don't need the chamber education, don't require the solstice disappearances, don't wait for visitors to unlock their potential. They're born already changed, already connected, already knowing things that should take years to learn. A teacher in Minneapolis reported that her entire kindergarten class suddenly stopped playing during recess and stood in a perfect circle, holding hands, humming in harmony at a frequency that made her teeth ache. They stood like that for exactly 3 minutes and 33 seconds, then resumed playing as if nothing had happened. When asked what they were doing, they all gave the same answer: practicing for the reunion. A pediatrician in Buenos Aires discovered that 12 of her young patients had developed additional organs, small nodes behind their sternums that served no apparent biological function, but pulsed with electrical activity during the new and full moons. The children weren't sick, showed no symptoms, seemed healthier than their peers. But brain scans revealed neural activity in regions that should have been dormant, connections that shouldn't exist, patterns that resembled the symbols on Elizabeth Bellwether's book. These aren't isolated incidents. They're happening everywhere, increasing in frequency, becoming harder to explain away or cover up. The transformation isn't waiting for 2032. It's accelerating, pushing through ahead of schedule, as if something has changed in the timeline, some catalyst has been introduced that's speeding up the process. The watchers think they know what it is. In 2019, a construction crew in Alabama, working on a new shopping center, accidentally breached one of the underground chambers. Not the one beneath the Bellweather property, but another one, older, deeper, connected to the network but predating the documented cycles. They found things down there that shouldn't exist, architecture that defied physics, organic machinery that was still functioning after centuries, and something else, something the construction crew wouldn't talk about, even after signing NDAs and receiving substantial payments for their silence. But one of them kept a sample. A small piece of what looked like crystallized tissue, neither plant nor animal nor mineral, but something that partook of all three. He sold it on the dark web to someone claiming to be a researcher, but who was actually a facilitator, one of those working to speed up the transformation. And that sample, that piece of living impossibility from the deep chambers, it was analyzed, synthesized, and introduced into the water supply of 3 major cities. Not enough to cause immediate changes, not enough to trigger alarms or health crises, just enough to accelerate the genetic markers already present in the population. Just enough to wake up dormant DNA sequences in those who carry the bloodlines. Just enough to push us past the point of no return. The water contamination was discovered and cleaned up within weeks, but it was too late. The catalyst had been introduced. The transformation that should have taken 3 more cycles to complete is happening now, in this generation, possibly within the next 7 years. The 2032 disappearances won't be the beginning of another cycle, but the completion of all cycles, the final integration between what we were and what we're becoming. You want to know how deep this goes? Every major religion has prophecies that align with the pattern. The rapture, the Hindu Kalpa cycles, the Buddhist concepts of rebirth and transformation, the Norse Ragnarok. They're all describing the same event from different cultural perspectives. The ancient mystery schools, the Eleusinian mysteries, the Orphic rites, the Mithraic initiations, they were all preparing selected bloodlines for this transformation, encoding the genetic markers that would flower into full change when the time was right. The visitors aren't alien to Earth, they're Earth's own future, reaching back to ensure their creation. The chambers aren't invasion points but transformation centers, chrysallize where humanity pupates into its next form. The sisters aren't victims but volunteers, chosen by their genetics and their time to be bridges between what we were and what will become. But knowing this doesn't make it less terrifying. Understanding the pattern doesn't mean accepting it. Because for all the talk of evolution and transcendence, for all the promises of something greater, the simple truth is that what we are now, this human experience, this individual consciousness, this way of being in the world, it's going to end. Whether what replaces it is better or worse, it won't be us anymore. I've seen the transformed ones, the numbered children who've aged enough to show their true nature. They still look human from a distance, still move through our world, still interact with unchanged people. But up close, if you know what to look for, you can see the difference. Their eyes don't quite focus on 3-dimensional space anymore. Their movements have a fluidity that suggests more joints than our anatomy allows. And when they think no one's watching, they sometimes phase partially out of our reality, becoming translucent, revealing geometries underneath that hurt to perceive. They're not unhappy. That's what's really unsettling. They remember being human, remember fear and pain and limitation, and they're grateful to have moved beyond it. They look at unchanged humans the way we might look at children, with a mixture of fondness and pity, knowing we're clinging to a developmental stage we'll eventually have to outgrow. But what if we don't want to outgrow it? What if we want to remain human, flawed and limited and mortal, as we are? The pattern doesn't care. The transformation doesn't ask permission. It moves through us like evolution itself, inexorable and indifferent to individual will. There are resistance groups, of course, people who've learned about the pattern and are trying to stop it. They destroy suspected chamber sites, hunt down numbered children, try to interfere with families that match the sister configuration. But their actions often accelerate the very thing they're trying to prevent. Every chamber they destroy releases spores into the environment. Every numbered child they kill releases pheromones that trigger defensive transformations in others. Every family they save from the pattern becomes a chaos point that spreads unpredictable changes through the network. The truth is, the pattern has evolved beyond our ability to stop it. It's anti-fragile now, growing stronger from everything that tries to destroy it. The more we resist, the faster it adapts. The more we understand, the deeper it integrates with our consciousness. Even this story, this warning, this revelation, it's part of the pattern now, spreading the knowledge that prepares minds for transformation. You see, that's the final twist, the last secret that makes everything else irrelevant. The pattern isn't happening to us, it's happening through us, because of us, as us. Every choice we make, every action we take, every thought we think about it, becomes part of its structure. We're not victims of an external force, but participants in our own metamorphosis, co-creating the thing we're becoming, even as we fear it. The Bellweather sisters understood this in those chambers. They saw that resistance and acceptance were both part of the pattern, that fear and fascination were both fuel for transformation, that the human story was always leading to this moment of change. Some of them chose to accelerate it, to become willing vessels for the new form. Others, like Catherine, chose to resist, not because they thought they could stop it, but because resistance itself was necessary, the friction that would refine the transformation into something more perfect. Every story about them, every investigation into the pattern, every attempt to understand or prevent what's happening, it all feeds into the same outcome. We're building our own chrysalis, spinning the silk of our transformation from the threads of our fear and curiosity and desperate need to understand. And when we finally emerge, when the convergence completes and humanity becomes something else, we'll look back on these moments of terror and resistance as necessary parts of our development, the way a butterfly might remember the caterpillar's fear of dissolution. But I'm running out of time to tell you this. The changes are accelerating in me too, the numbered child genetics, asserting themselves more strongly with each passing day. Soon I won't be able to think in purely human terms anymore. Won't be able to translate what I know into words you can understand. The knowledge will remain, but the ability to communicate it in human language will fade, replaced by forms of communication that require transformed nervous systems to comprehend. Before I lose the ability to warn you, let me be clear about what's coming. In 2032, it won't just be 4 sisters from selected families who disappear. It will be everyone who carries the markers. Everyone whose bloodline traces back to the numbered children. Everyone who's been touched by the pattern. Conservative estimates suggest that's 30% of the human population. Less conservative estimates put it closer to 60. The most pessimistic calculations, the ones the watchers whisper about in their secret meetings, suggest it might be everyone. That the contamination has spread so far and so deep that there's no untouched human DNA left. The disappearances will last longer this time. Not 3 weeks, but 3 months. And when people return, if they return, they won't pretend to be human anymore. There'll be something new, something that exists partially in our reality and partially in others, something that can manipulate matter and energy in ways we call impossible, because our physics doesn't account for the dimensions they'll inhabit. The unchanged humans, if any remain, will have a choice: join the transformation voluntarily, or live as relics in a world that's moving beyond their ability to understand or influence. Some will choose transformation, drinking the red well water, eating the strange fruit, accepting the integration. Others will cling to humanity, forming enclaves of resistance that gradually dwindle as their children are born with the markers, as the pattern finds its way into even the most protected bloodlines. But maybe, just maybe, there's a third option. Catherine Bellweather, the real one who escaped, she left more than just warnings. She left instructions. Hidden in her journals, encoded in her seemingly mad ravings, are procedures for something she called the severance. Not a way to stop the pattern, but a way to step outside it, to exist parallel to the transformation without being absorbed by it. The Watchers have been trying to decode her instructions for almost 2 centuries. They think they're close to understanding, close to finding the frequency or formula or ritual that could allow some humans to remain human even as the rest of the species transforms. It might be possible to create pockets of preserved humanity, bubbles of the old reality existing alongside the new one, connected but not integrated, aware but not absorbed. Is that survival or just delayed extinction? Is preserving humanity in isolated pockets while the rest of the species evolves like keeping zoo animals while their wild counterparts go extinct? These are questions that won't have answers until the choice is already made, until the convergence forces us to decide what we value more, our humanity or our future. I don't know what I'll choose when the time comes. The numbered child in me wants to embrace the transformation, to dissolve into the collective consciousness that the sisters dance around in those underground chambers. But the human in me, the part that still remembers what it was like before I understood the pattern, wants to resist, to remain individual and limited and free. Maybe that's the real horror of the Bellweather sisters' story. Not that they were transformed against their will, but that they chose transformation, saw what they would become, and walked into it willingly. And maybe that's what we'll all do. When the moment comes, and the chambers open, and the visitors arrive to guide us through our metamorphosis, maybe we'll discover that what we feared was actually what we wanted all along, that the pattern isn't imposing change but revealing a change we've already chosen, on some level deeper than conscious thought. The ground where the Bellweather house stood is more than dead now. It's become something else, a kind of anti-life that doesn't destroy but transforms, doesn't kill but converts. Plants that grow near it develop new organs. Animals that cross it emerge with different behaviors. And people who stand on it too long report visions of a world where the transformation is complete, where humanity has become something that makes our current form look like crude prototypes. They describe cities that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, beings that can manipulate reality through pure thought, technologies that are indistinguishable from magic because they operate on principles we haven't discovered yet. They see the Earth itself transformed, no longer a planet, but something more like a conscious entity, with humanity as its nervous system, the numbered children as its neurons, the sisters as its synapses firing across space and time. Is it paradise or perdition, transcendence or oblivion? The answer depends on your perspective, and your perspective depends on how much you've already been changed by the pattern. Those deep in transformation see it as liberation. Those still mostly humans see it as horror. And those caught between, like me, like many who know the truth but haven't fully transformed, we see it as both, as neither, as something beyond our current capacity to judge. But judgment is a luxury we don't have anymore. The pattern moves forward regardless of our opinions about it. The cycles continue whether we approve or not. The transformation accelerates with each passing day, each new birth, each moment of awareness that feeds into the collective understanding of what's happening. You're part of it now. This knowledge, these words, this story, it's in you now, changing you in ways you won't notice until it's too late. You'll find yourself looking for patterns, seeing connections, understanding things you shouldn't be able to understand. You'll dream of underground chambers and dancing sisters, and breathing darkness that might be breathing light from another perspective. And slowly, perhaps so slowly you won't notice, you'll stop being afraid of the transformation and start being curious about it. That's how it begins. Curiosity, then understanding, then acceptance, then participation, then transformation. The Bellweather sisters were just the first documented case in our era. But the pattern is older than civilization, older than humanity as we currently define it. We're not the first species to undergo this metamorphosis. We won't be the last. We're just the current carriers of something that moves through biological systems the way fire moves through forests, transforming everything it touches into fuel for further transformation. The year 2032 approaches like a wall of storm clouds on the horizon, visible but not yet overhead, inevitable but not yet immediate. 7 years to prepare for something we can't fully understand. 7 years to decide whether to resist or accept, fight or submit, preserve or transform. 7 years that will pass in an eye blink and last forever. Time itself growing strange as the pattern asserts itself more strongly. Some of you reading this will have daughters in the next 7 years. Sets of 4, born at the right intervals, carrying the markers whether you know it or not. You'll watch them grow and wonder if they're part of the pattern, if they'll disappear on some future solstice, if they'll return changed and changing everything around them. You'll love them and fear them in equal measure, these daughters who might be bridges to humanity's future or harbingers of its end. Others will recognize yourselves in this story, realize that you're numbered children, or descendants of numbered children, carriers of the transformation whether you knew it or not. You'll feel the changes accelerating in your own bodies, your own minds, your own perceptions of reality. You'll have to choose whether to resist these changes or embrace them, whether to warn others or guide them toward their own transformation. And some of you, a very few, will do what Catherine Bellweather did. You'll see the pattern for what it is and choose to step outside it, to find the spaces between transformation, where something like traditional humanity might survive. You'll become the seeds of an alternative future, one where both forms can coexist, where transformation is a choice rather than an inevitability. But whatever you choose, however you respond, know that the pattern has already accounted for your decision. Resistance and acceptance, fear and fascination, warning and welcoming, they're all threads in the same vast tapestry. The Bellweather sisters saw this tapestry complete, saw the picture it makes when all the threads are woven together. Some say it's beautiful beyond description. Others say it's so alien that beauty and horror become meaningless distinctions. We'll all see it soon enough. 7 years is nothing in the scope of the pattern, everything in the scope of a human life. The transformation that started in Limestone County, Alabama, in 1829, that has spread through bloodlines and across continents, that has hidden in genetics and emerged in dreams, that has been building towards something vast and patient and inevitable, it's almost complete. The Bellweather sisters were the announcement. The numbered children were the preparation. The 2032 convergence will be the culmination. And what comes after, what humanity becomes when the pattern completes, that's a story that can't be told in human language, because human language won't exist anymore, not as we understand it. But perhaps that's not an ending but a beginning. Perhaps what we call human is just one phase of something larger, the way childhood is a phase of individual development. Perhaps the fear we feel facing transformation is the same fear a caterpillar feels entering the cocoon, necessary but temporary, forgotten once wings unfold. Or perhaps it's exactly what it appears to be, the end of one thing and the beginning of something else, neither better nor worse, but absolutely, irreversibly different. The Bellweather sisters crossed that threshold in 1829. Soon, willingly or not, we'll all follow them into whatever waits on the other side of human. The pattern continues. The cycles turn. The transformation accelerates. And somewhere, in a house you might drive past tomorrow, 4 sisters are preparing for a journey they don't yet understand, carrying a destiny they didn't choose, about to become part of something that started before they were born and will continue long after humanity, as we know it, is just a memory preserved in the consciousness of whatever we become.